everybody. Happy Tuesday night. This is December 10th, 2024. We have a special pre-MLS draft across the pitch episode. I believe our first off-season show, Jose, maybe. I think maybe you guys did a show, but either way, the Union season, as we know, is over, but the Union talk does not stop. We continue as we wait until the 2025 season, and despite the Union's little giving away of their draft picks, we have a lot to talk about with the MLS draft coming up. So tonight we're joined by Jose Nunez as always, as well as our friend Todd Lewis. And tonight Mark Kelkenberg as well will be joining us to speak about prospects, his time, I believe, in California for the MLS Next. Again, I'm going to learn today from what Mark's got to say. So without further ado, I'm going to say hello to our friends first. Todd, how are you doing tonight?
Doing pretty good. And yeah, you're right, Mike. With the off season, the content never stops with the Philadelphia Union. And yeah, people that thought that this would be a boring, quiet off season, yeah, it's anything but with the Philadelphia Union. So lots to talk about. And I thank you guys both for having me on tonight's show.
Of course. Jose, I have not seen you face to face in a while, so it's nice to see you tonight, buddy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. As Todd mentioned and nailed it, there's really no downtime with this team as as I think as bored as fans get and maybe frustrated with moves not happening or whatever, a lot is shaking and moving behind the scenes. It hasn't either been unearthed or it's just taking its time. So this team is percolating, trying to get some stuff done. It's exciting. I'll just put it that way.
Absolutely. So before we get too far into things, the MLS draft is coming up. Do you guys have the exact date of when that is? Because I am clueless right now. Well, I'm in college basketball mode, so please educate me here a bit.
The exact date. I'm sorry, I was reading something else. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
2025. The exact date. I know it's coming. It's December 20th.
December 20th. Okay, so we got 10 days to go. Once we get Mark on, I'm sure he's going to share some thoughts as well, too. But the Union have traded away their draft picks to Colorado, I believe is correct. So, Todd, I want to go to you first. I know you had a very passionate rant on Twitter. I know everybody who followed and commented on that is here tonight watching. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that move.
Man, you're not kidding. And I know we don't want to have an hour episode like Jose and I usually have when it's just the two of us or when it's the three of us. So we're going to go ahead and try to keep this brief. But yeah, I said on Twitter, I'm disappointed. And I think that it's downright disrespectful from Ernst Tanner to give up on the process for the next 3 seasons. And yeah, the Union, I think there was maybe some confusion. The Union could, if they wanted to, trade back into the draft. I don't see that happening, especially this season where they had the 8th pick. And maybe somebody in the comments can let us know the last time the Union had a top 10 pick in the MLS Super Draft. It has to have been, at least 11 years, 12 years, something like that. But I think that it's a little bit disappointing where, yeah, I get it, and fans aren't wrong where these homegrown players are typically developed better than college players. But the whole way I see it, at least, is that, and this is no disrespect to any of the guys who had just signed homegrown deals, but they're young players, 17, 18 years old. They're still growing into their bodies compared to a 20, 21-year-old in college. And, I think people maybe had took my thoughts on Ernst Tanner passing on every single draft pick as, a disrespect towards the homegrown players. And that's not what I meant at all. But, I look at a player from college where I think they could be more useful off the bench. I'm not saying that any of these college kids, if the Union would have drafted anybody, would have been solidified starters. But I think options coming off the bench to close out games, being spot starters, it definitely would have made sense, and the Union potentially could have got somebody there to do that job. And I think CJ Olney, David Vasquez, 2 players that signed homegrown contracts last year, Kevin Sullivan last year as well. These are young players that are still growing into the body. And watching MLS Next Pro last year, and I didn't watch every single game, but there was moments last year that all 3 players got bodied off the ball in MLS Next Pro, which in my opinion isn't, the greatest league in the world. And I think if you speak to players that play in that league that have played elsewhere, I think they would tell you the same thing. But yeah, I just don't agree that you look at the players the last couple of years. I mean, there's so many players, and Mark can speak
Yeah.
better to this than I could because it's what he does. He watches college soccer 24/7. He knows these players a lot better than me. But one player that I look at a huge example is Moises Mbito. Colorado Rapids drafted him and with the third pick in 2023, and we saw him go for a little bit over $7 million this season. Got sold by the Rapids, and this is a heck of a player. And a lot of players, a lot of people on social media were like, "Well, you got to look at positions that typical college guys get drafted by, whether it be center backs, whether it be forwards or goalkeepers. And the Union don't really need a goalkeeper, but center back they absolutely do." Forward Ernst Tanner said that at his end of the season press conference that they need a hold up striker. I look at somebody like Patrick Ajiman with Charlotte, who absolutely bullied Jack Elliott this season in all three matchups that the Union played against them. He's been a really good piece for them, and so. Yeah, I didn't mean it for a disrespect to the homegrown guys, but I still think that there's talent in the college system, and I'm glad we have Mark in here tonight, and maybe he can, sway some people's minds on that better than what I tried to on social media. And at the end of the day, we're all not going to agree, and that's fine. Having healthy discussions, what it's all about. All of us don't agree on everything, and that's totally fine. But as long as people can have an open mind and see from the other side too, I think you're doing a job.
Todd, that's a perfect segue. I'm going to actually bring Mark in now because I think for someone like myself, I watch MLS, I watch a Union. I know nothing about college soccer. So I'm really glad that we have Mark on here to talk about this. I'm going to bring him into the studio now to get on live. Mark, you should be able to hear us now? You're good to go?
Yep, I can hear you guys.
Awesome, Mark. So thanks for joining us again. I guess share some thoughts on your background, just so people have an idea of what you do every single week with the scouting, and then go from there.
Yeah, I mean, so I did a lot of stuff last year for the draft, just kind of putting out some content, talking to a handful of teams over the course of the time, and I think even after the draft last year, it just never even stopped. So we went straight into the spring season, got to see a lot of the guys around the North Carolina area, and then also I went up to Columbus for one of the other, I guess, leagues, if you want to call it that. So they've really, a lot of these guys, and the concern, I guess, prior to this last year was they only play a handful of months, but that's all changed now, and a lot of teams are playing spring seasons, and then they go right into a summer season with USL League 2 or NPSL, which I follow a lot as well. And then obviously it's a quick turnaround for them to come into the fall, and that's what I've been watching a lot, obviously. So it's been a full year in the making leading up to next week, and then I'm currently at the hotel for the players. That's why I was stuck in traffic for all the viewers. So a little bit behind schedule, but we'll pick things up here.
Absolutely. So one question that a follower has commented on, maybe Mark or Todd, maybe you guys can kind of shed some light on this. Is there a hit percentage of MLS draft picks in the age of academy players, we'll say at least 5 years, and a hit percentage outside of top 10 picks? So Mark, you want to try to answer that question first before I shoot to Todd and Jose?
Yeah. So I think back in March, right before the spring season, I wrote like a 10,000 word article on all of the random guys who have played in college and where they've ended up. Like all around the world, some of these guys go back to their home countries, and then also a lot of guys. A lot of the US1 players are staples in a lot of MLS teams. Like obviously the final, I think Todd, you reported upon that, like the Nellis brothers, or Nealis, or however you want to pronounce it, but and then I mean a handful of these guys are going to be towards the top of MLS all-time leading scorers. Like some of them even played D2. Like Kai Kamara played D2, I think, and then Wondolowski as well. So I think you can find really good players, and I think they're have a little bit of extra years of experience in conferences and fighting for national championships, which aren't easy to do.
Sure.
But that's like part of what I'll say is there's a lot of players out there. Like even recently, Aiden Morris spent a year in college, and now he's in EFL championship. So, yeah.
Todd, I mean, I'm going to ask you basically the same question, but also, what is, I guess, for somebody who like me who doesn't know a lot about college soccer, what's the negative viewpoint on college soccer? Why is it not viewed as differently or as highly as other leagues?
I think Jose was going to say something. Jose, you want to?
Todd, you want to know, Jose?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I was going to say to build off of Mark's point is, if we think about the one team that this fan base is enamored by, and I think you can draw a lot of comparisons, and Mark sort of touched on it with Aiden Morris, is Columbus Crew, right? Think about the players within that roster that ended up getting involved at multiple levels, collegiate, MLS Next Pro, or a similar league abroad, and then coming back into MLS, getting their chance, etc. It can make a difference. And, I go back to also an instance where someone who could have been or was part of the union system went to college, went that route, and then ended up hurting the union. Think no further than back in June, Leo Afonso with Inter Miami, who went on to score that game winner at the dying embers, I think, and Miami was down a player or two. So again, I think he was a Virginia Cavalier, if I recall correctly. So these players pop in and out all the time. So it's an interesting balance to, and we'll talk more about the differences between a collegiate player and maybe what an academy player can bring, and
Sure.
Sometimes it's just that growth in college can be so important that these academy kids just don't get. So I'll throw it back to you guys, but I wanted to bring the Columbus Crew comparison since I think that the fan base is so in love with that group, and rightfully so.
Todd, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and piggyback off of Jose's point and take it a step further with Columbus Crew. I mean, Sean Zadorsky, I think he played at Georgetown, but then he got a homegrown contract with Columbus Crew, if I'm not mistaken. Patrick Schulte played at St. Louis. You had Mo Farsi, spent a year in college in Canada, I believe it was. Philip Quinton is a player who also played in college a couple years ago, and I know he's no longer with the club. But yeah, I mean, this is a team that's been successful, found successful players in the college ranks that have had their budget charge where they could go out and get top players like a Cucho Hernandez, a Diego Rossi, and then they just get role players around them. And that's something Jose and myself, and I know you too, Mike, on the show have talked about so many times. It's like, if the union could go that route where they could invest heavily in DP players, that positions that matter. And don't get me wrong, they've done that with a Mikel Uwa. They've invested into a striker with Mikel. Highest transfer fee paid by the club, $2.8 million. Daniel Gazdag, another one of those players that plays in a prime position, but then filling out the rest of your roster like Columbus, I think that makes a big deal. But going back to your original question, Mike, you said, what's the biggest difference between college and in the academy? Well, a couple years ago, I was fortunate enough to be at the United Coaches conference in Philadelphia, and Ernst Tanner was doing a talk there, and he was asked about this, and he said, the biggest difference in his opinion was, you lose that time with those players while they're away at college. You don't get to see them every single day. And Ernst Tanner said, that would be the biggest disadvantage. And by the time that they come back from college, Ernst, in his opinion, feels like, you've lost a significant amount of developmental time. You're coming in as a 21-year-old where, you look at these young players, academy players, that's when teams start to sell those guys. And
sure.
I totally get that argument, but my whole argument would be, and I said it at the beginning of the show, is, a lot of these young guys that the union have signed to homegrown deals, haven't filled into the body yet. I've watched them get bullied in MLS Next Pro, and you bring a 21-year-old who may not be the highest profitable player to sell like a homegrown player is, but I think some of these guys just develop more into the body and they can handle the physicality. I think a lot of people forget about how physical a league MLS really is. And all these people that want to see Kevin Sullivan play more and more and more, he's a 15-year-old kid. Like, he still has a ways to go to grow into his body. And he might be technical on the ball. He might be quick and everything, but all it takes is one center back to, cut off his run and just hit him off the ball. And hello, welcome to MLS, Kevin Sullivan.
So the Union have typically not really focused too much on the draft. I mean, we have had Andre Blake, we've had Jack Elliott, excuse me. I got my Eagles hat on right now with Jack Elliott, coming from West Virginia. So we've had players that get drafted, but we haven't really focused too much on. Now we've got rid of our picks for the next 3 years for Colorado. To me, as a Union fan, I feel like we're putting all our eggs in one basket with the academy, and that's just strictly the route we're going to go. And this is Ernst and Sugarman's plan, and nothing else really matters to them. And that's kind of the impression I got from this news that came out. So, Todd, I guess to your point, like, I'm not knocking the way our Quinn Sullivans and Jack McGlynn's. I'm not saying they're bad players. I just why are we not having some backup plans? Why don't we have other options? Why can't we test out different waters before we just hone in on that one thing? Mark, actually, I have a question for you next in terms of how the league is moving. The Union, we know what they did with the draft picks. What are other teams doing right now with maybe more of an eye on college players?
I think the primary goal is to ultimately create a first-team player. Because if you can get a guy to be a serviceable first-team player, you're getting these guys for free. You're putting in minimal money, like Soccer Nerdy brought that up. And that's like the big benefit, and I think that's what a lot of teams look for. Is there's a few different ways of doing it, especially with the bringing in the sophomore class. So some teams will automatically be looking for pro-ready guys that can feasibly make their roster and add some good depth pieces. And then there are quite a few, or we'll just say a few, that I would say are first-team players, like straight in the training camp. They'll come into the team and actually see meaningful minutes. And I think with having the second team and the first team, and all the loan opportunities, these guys are getting more minutes at the professional level pretty soon, and they get a lot of these technical staffs get creative with how they can get guys more up to speed. And then ultimately, the dream scenario is you can sell the guys to Europe. And I think that there's probably 10 guys in this draft that one day will, within the next few 3 to 5 years, they'll be in Europe. And some are already just going to bypass the draft in general because they have certain passports that allow them to, pursue their dream over in Europe, like before all this.
So you mentioned about 10 or so players. What are some names that are currently, the hot names going around there? Because, as a Union fan, we're worried about other teams drafting players and obviously adding to the roster when we're not pulling from that same pool. What are some players right now that we should be paying attention to in the draft?
Well, not going to say too much about some of the details, but in terms of some of the American players that you hear a lot about are Tate Johnson from UNC, Hub, GA. The kid's an animal, and he's played next pro as a teenager. He grew up in USL Championship, making debuts at 16.
Wow.
Definitely a pro level player, and I think a lot of teams are recognizing that. And then his teammate, another guy that I like a lot. He's got pro level speed for sure, and then he's just one of the smartest center backs in the business. But Charlie Harper, and that's like a little point that I'll say as well. I can see maybe 3 or 4 of these guys, especially when you factor in some of the Canadians. Some of these guys will be national team players one day. And, it's kind of funny, certain countries will value their players who's still playing college. They don't kind of stick up their nose to it. And, getting like the U23 call ups and things like that. So those are a couple. Max Floriani in St. Louis, like I've kind of heard his name a lot. Obviously, everyone knows Michael Adedukin. Not sure exactly where he falls, but just being international. But I mean, he's a pro level player. Hakeem Karamoko, still only a teenager. I mean, he played his entire freshman season as a 17-year-old, this year as an 18-year-old, and he's got so much more potential to show. And then, I mean, just there's so many guys that when you talk about development, the Alex Harrises of the world, where kid's only 19, he scores at will, and it's kind of like a prospect deal. Like, you don't expect maybe some of these guys to come in tomorrow or come in January and just automatically make the first team. Like, they're kind of a 2-year investment, because when you see some of these guys, you're like, man, imagine him in 2 or 3 years from now, at what level they can be. And then, of course, this is where a lot of the fans, they'll just up and forget that these guys even came from college. They'll be like, holy crap, where did this guy come from? And college will be 2 years in the rearview mirror. And then it's like a reminder, like, well, we picked him up in the draft. And, I mean, the list goes on. Like, I think that this is a pretty strong draft between all the different categories of players, like pro ready, kind of 2-3 year prospects. And again, with the sophomores, you can draft a guy and have him go back to college and bring him in over the summer, train with the guys, just to kind of like help monitor the progress from there as well.
Interesting. Jose, you got a question, you said?
Mark, thank you for sharing your time with us. Jose Nunez, AAT Sports, first time, long time reader of your work. Wanted to ask you, when we worked together last year with the draft, and we watched the Union pick up 3 players out of nowhere, and Francesco Montali out of BU, Zach Bohane out of Stanford, and Stas Korzanowski, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, out of Penn. We sort of talked about this in terms of teams utilizing that change that happened last year, where I think starting as a sophomore, you can now be drafted versus in previous years, I think it was junior and seniors only. And I think you started to touch on this. Do you foresee a lot of teams doing what you described in terms of seeing these as long-term projects, and if they don't pan out, they don't pan out, right? It was just a draft pick versus selling it for $50,000 of funny money, like the Union are approaching it?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely depends on the team. Like, some of the teams I've talked to, they only want to talk about the guys who are ready to leave college and want to go pro, or be able to bring these guys in the preseason. And other teams might, and this might be kind of like a later round thing, where they pick up a guy knowing that he's going to go back to college. And I think you see it with kind of the Zach Bohane thing of, I don't know if he'll ever play for the Union, just because, you draft him as a sophomore. His plan is always to finish his degree. So it's like, by the time he's ready to jump in to a preseason, like, is he even going to be wanting to do that? Or, some people talk about other opportunities that may exist or may not. But it's a long time to wait, especially when, they're going to go back to the same system that they were. You just kind of like lose track of these guys. I mean, he's had a good year in terms of like some of the accolades and stuff, but like, I mean, maybe that was, and I don't know, maybe some of the thought process, because it's kind of funny, not to skip topics, but I wonder what last year's draft and its outcome, because obviously Stas went in and trained with the team, and I'm not sure what the assessments were and all that, and then Montali didn't end up signing. So I'm not sure if, like Ernst was saying, based on the outcome of last year's draft, we need money to make this roster work. And I know the first team scouts are going all over the world right now to find true first-team players, and I think that was the priority, especially with the fan demands and things like that. But it is funny, obviously, Chris Zitterbar, Paul Killian, big-time advocates of the college game in the new to your staff, and not giving those guys at least like one shot to find, because I know they were doing it. Like, I even met up with them, and like we were live in a couple games to go see a couple of the college players. I might even name drop them. I didn't ask Zetterbart, but obviously they have no intention of drafting them. But I think there was a little bit of carryover from last year. Like, Zetterbart knew some of the guys that he really has liked over his time with the Rapids. Actually both of them are here at the showcase. Both I've written about extensively. So they're guys I like as well. But yeah, kind of interesting. I mean, they had guys looking at the college game, and then, even I was kind of tipped off to the trade. I was like, I didn't say anything, obviously, because I'm not a reporter necessarily, but yeah, when I was like, yeah, there's going to be a massive trade that you don't see very often, and I was like, oh god, a good trade or a bad trade? And he was like, well, depends on what side you're on, but obviously you like the college game, so it might not be a good trade for from what your standpoint. But yeah.
Todd, did you want to go ahead with your question?
Thanks so much, Mike. Todd Lewis, thank you so much, Mike, for this opportunity. We'll make this short. So, looking at last year's draft, 20% of the eligible players signed MLS or MLS Next Pro contracts. Where you look at last year's draft compared to this year's, would you say that they're similar in terms of the quality that's eligible that you expect to be drafted this season? Or do you think next year's draft class is going to be, last year's draft class, is going to be a little bit better than this year, or just a little bit too hard to project?
Well, I think the quality in general year after year will inevitably improve. I think there's several teams out there that do take an exclusive, like we were just at the MLS Next Fest, and my God, there's college coaches from every single school you can imagine, like watching all these Next academies. Mm-hmm. And they want to outfit a lot of their teams with some of these guys. So, I think it is beneficial for a lot of the Next Academy guys to get into a school for as long as they want to be growing in their game, because not everyone's going to sign an 18-year-old homegrown deal. They're going to have to find somewhere to go, and I think the college game will always be there for these players. I think there might be a change in how it looks, like, certain conference talks and how to realign things to make it feel a little bit more like a pseudo pro league, I guess. So quality inevitably will just, keep growing as players get better and, that their foundations are better. In terms of, sorry, I'm trying to track back to your question. What was it, Tom? You said draft
just
classes.
Comparing last year's draft class to this year's draft class.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this was one of the points I was going to make. So obviously, we all saw like the Next Pro kind of turnover, and I think it's going to be kind of like a carousel if this trend continues. I think, and this is where a lot of players will have to kind of understand that, just because you get drafted, just because you sign, like, doesn't mean that, after the first year you're going to be shipped out, and they're just kind of sifting the sand of the players. Like, if obviously, you draft, let's say 3 players a year, 2 might stay, 1 will get released, and then maybe from the year prior, a couple other players will get released depending on, the 2+1 or the 1+1. It's all, a lot of clubs will just turn down players, and now they're having to go find a new team after only a year of playing in a pro league. So, and they're just, ultimately looking for the guys that stick, and obviously you can find players. So it's almost like kind of a weird situation for the players. It's technically like a year-long trial in a way. You get drafted, go into spring, sign an ex-pro deal, and there's no guarantee that you'll last longer than a year. But the players that do, they could be real players by year 2 to 5.
I have a question for you, Mark. So, I mean, again, I have more of a basketball background. So for us, we see some of these players come in from international waters to play in college. We see even the NBA. The NBA has a very big attention to international players. And a lot of times in the draft, you'll see, 3 players from Duke and then some random guy from Turkey, for example. Has the international, I guess, presence and pool infiltrated college ranks at all, where it's now harder for American-grown players to kind of work their way up?
Yeah, I think there's certain programs that do a good job of balancing it out, and they can there's some good equality from bringing in international players, some MLS guys, there's so many other academy systems out there like UCNL, USL Academy, and things like that. That some programs are very good at balancing. Some are exclusively international. And it's kind of funny. Sometimes you'll see 24 to 26-year-olds, and they're all from big time academies. There's some guys, one of my favorite center backs this year is a Real Sociedad product. There's several guys from Girona who've had really good years, and Bayern Leverkusen had there's a kid at Maryland. So it's kind of funny, everyone, I think, imagines sometimes that these college players are just I always joke, I think I've made this joke to you, Jose, that people turn their nose up to college because it's everyone just envisions they're at a bar and some 300-pound dude was yeah, I used to play in college back in the day. And then they get this vision in their head of my God, this guy couldn't run at all, and he was a former college player. So people still think that exists, and it's no, these dudes are legit athletes, and the technical ability on them is far different than it was 10, 20 years ago.
Jose,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, Mark, and to that point, you and I have talked about it, and honestly, even just laughed, because these guys genuinely have no time off, right? They go into a summer season, they go into a fall season, they find ways to stay fit and get, my goodness, I think last year's when Kruger joined Wake Forest over the winter and was practicing with them ahead of a spring season. So it's not playing college sports, especially in the ACC as a Division I player in that conference. You are basically a professional and treated as such. So the misunderstanding from the fan base and really just across the league is that these players are kind of what you're describing, right? Saturday nights are going out drinking and having benders. Maybe they're doing some of that. I don't know. They're college kids, but nonetheless, 90% of them, 95% of them are just so interested in taking the next step. And that's through the draft, or, as you mentioned, skipping this league altogether and leveraging their passports or going back to their home countries, etc.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'll give a little point here. So, there's last year some internationals went back to their home countries. They play in the same leagues that I know the Union faithful will be pissed off when they're why are we getting players from Slovenian's second league? Well, it's some of these guys have gone back to the Danish second division, English second and third tier, and even over the end of the summer, there was already 4 college guys. There was interest from Birmingham City for one of these guys. So it's people take notice, and obviously some of these different Belgian clubs, they'll actually take a look at the college level to kind of loosely scout this player pool as a whole, just to kind of beat some of those transfer fees and take in guys again.
So, I mean, we talked about the Union briefly there, and I know, Todd, this whole conversation kind of came from your post. Like, let's talk about this more in depth. The Union obviously aren't drafting anybody this year, but we have a lot of holes to fill. One of the things that I guess maybe I'm an American sports fan that's kind of spoiled. It's kind of odd for me as a fan to see a team giving away draft picks and signing players and extending players when there's not even a coach in place yet. So I'm kind of curious, Todd or Jose, it's kind of more Union related. What do you think the Union could have benefited from in this draft? And are you concerned at all that we haven't locked in a coach yet while we're making all these decisions with the season only like 2 months away?
I'll go ahead and take this if you don't mind, Jose. Your second part of that question, I'm not concerned that the Union don't have a head coach yet, that they're going ahead and making all these decisions. I mean, that's what you pay your sporting director to do, right? I mean, you ideally hire the coach to be on the field and coach and not making these decisions behind the scene. I mean, yeah, sure. You want to have your head coach have some input of what players they would be interested in and maybe how they would potentially approach a draft. But at the end of the day, that's what you hire Ernst Tanner to do. So yeah, I'm not concerned about that. But the first point of your question, yeah, I mean, just looking at the players that have been drafted the last couple of years, it's goalkeepers, center backs, and forwards. And I think the Union definitely could have benefited from a center back. I think the Union could have benefited from a forward. They've been desperate for a third forward for the last couple of years here. And Jose and I talked about this on my show 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I don't know, whenever we last recorded, where Ernst Tanner specifically said that they're looking for a hold-up striker. And the Union really haven't had that hold-up striker since Kasper Schmeichel. And, yeah, I mean, we've seen forwards come out of the draft. I talked about Patrick Agyemang, who I wouldn't say is really that big of a hold-up forward. Duncan McGuire is another big player, Orlando City, sixth overall pick in 2023. You had Max Arfston, who I know wasn't a striker. He was more of a forward. Then he gets converted to a wingback in Columbus's system. Logan Farrington with Dallas tore up against the Union in MLS Next Pro with North Texas in that final. I know he split his time with North Texas and Dallas this season. So, I mean, those three positions are typically the positions that get drafted a lot in this draft. But yeah, I think center back, the Union could have potentially looked there. Mark would probably be better for this, answering, top center backs, top strikers. And the Union, they had the 8th overall pick this year. And like I said at the beginning, the Union haven't had a top pick in 11, 12 years. Again, I probably should have looked this up when you guys were all talking, but yeah, that's a pretty serious pick. And people I know have said online, well, 1 through 10 is usually where you get your most value for picks and everything. But I look at a player like Yannick Bright with Inter Miami, who Chris, I saw from Battered MLS fans and Battered Herons, was in the comment sections. I don't know if he's still here, but just listening to them and seeing Inter Miami fans online, they were raving about this guy in the starting lineup because of how he helped that back line, how he had the legs to cover for Busquets. And that's a midfielder right there. So again, I mean, center back's a big need for the Union, midfield's a big need for the Union, and forward's a big need. And I don't expect them to go goalkeeper, but yeah, those are your main positions in college, I would say.
So then I guess this leads to 2 questions. Maybe also, Jose, you can chime in on this too. In terms of, how many rounds are there, first of all, in the MLS draft?
3
rounds. Okay. 3 rounds. So again, I'm trying to compare to what I know. In NFL, the first 2 rounds, you'll get a lot of prospects. 4 rounds, you can probably get starters. 5, 6, 7, you're not going to get a bunch of bench guys, whatever. NBA, typically the first round, the first 15 are your key potential all-stars. 15 on are, role players. Second round are usually just G League guys. So you mentioned the top 10 is kind of where the main talent is. So now I'm thinking NBA. Okay, if I'm getting rid of a top 10 NBA talent, I'm getting a good return on that draft pick. Do you think the Union got a good enough return on their draft picks that they gave away?
Well, it's for the next 3 years, right? So who knows what the Union are going to do the upcoming years? Maybe they surprise everybody. I know the fan base feels like the Union are just going to be back to those early days where they're not making the playoffs, and we'll see. Mark, you talked about it here 15, 20 minutes ago, where the team's scouting all over Europe looking for top talent, and a way that you do that to get as much money as possible is, you trade away picks. And
Sure.
I know people talked about, well, it seems like the Union just threw something on the wall the last couple of years with draft picks. These guys were never going to amount to anything. And I'm sure part of that was because Ernst Tanner couldn't find a trade partner. And he came up with a clever way this season to say, you know what, we're going to give away our 3 picks the next 3 years, and we're going to get, I think, $350,000 in GAM up to $600,000. And so, Jose and I have talked about this, and maybe fans get annoyed with it. I've seen some comments where fans are like, yeah, I don't care how much GAM this team gets, but, all of it matters for a team that's not going to spend a lot of money.
Sure.
However you can go out there and get your most with your resources. And yeah, drafting players would be a good use of your resources. But the fact of the matter is, Ernst Tanner doesn't value the draft, and he's shown time and time again with trading away draft picks and drafting players just to draft players. So that's how I would answer that.
Jose, how about yourself? Any thoughts on what the Union have done or what they got back in return? If you have what they got back in return too, if you can share that as well.
Yeah, I mean, to get 350 outright is I think good, because you never know what's going to happen. And if the Union go and perform well and outperform, honestly, I think that the entire fan base's expectations is probably fantastic value, especially if these guys are going to be very low bottom of the pile per se. I'm not saying quality, but they're going to be late picks. Then great, and you got 350, potentially up to $600,000. That's awesome. And you got to remember, GAM can be used for a couple of things in terms of paying down salaries, being used to, if I recall, trade for players, etc. So GAM has a lot of value that's not necessarily tangible, because it is funny money. It's made up numbers, right? It's like it's like hawk to a meme coin, right? It's like it has a value only in one market and one market only, and that's it, right? And it can help this team, and hopefully it allows the Union to feel comfortable gambling on maybe senior level players that can come in and play right away within the league, that are there, that maybe they can bring in and buy down salary wise, or maybe they can trade away GAM to bring in a player that's looking for a new start somewhere else. So it's, to me, whether it's time will tell. I think it's ultimately the answer, and Todd mentioned it, but it also comes down to, maybe this is throwing it back to Mark. What do the next 3 years of prospects look like, right? Like, are the Union missing out on a lot?
Yeah, and I think next year, too, just like given some of the positions that Todd brought up, I think, and I guess I'll rewind a little bit. So the 350, I'm assuming, is per year. Because otherwise, I mean, there's been trades that value the picks a lot more. I really hope it's not 9 picks worth that much, because, I mean, the Rapids definitely got the better end of that, just because, I mean, you go back to 2023 with Charlotte trading up to get Hamady Diop. I mean, they paid a lot more, I think, in GAM just for that one pick.
It's in total, Mark.
Oh my
God.
God.
So, yep, there you go. Anyway, let's just hope that the player performances are good and it can go up to 600. But yeah, I mean, this year, and the way I looked at it is, especially with this year for the Union, like just having some depth issues, like to not just, and I don't know, who knows, maybe, I'm sure they'll still be watching the draft, and maybe, if they're sitting there watching in the 3rd round and one of the guys that they like is there, maybe they pick up a round 3 pick for $50K and they get one of their guys that, because I know, like I said, that, Paul was doing, I think he was doing quite a bit of work to do this. And yeah, it's just you're missing out on, you know, one of the Pitt Panthers center backs who's a freshman this year, but the dude is an absolute beast. And next year I think there's going to be a frenzy over him. And you get some good hold up forwards right now that are in the running for a GA who came from Spanish academies, like big name academies. So, it's kind of one of those cases where, if like a Sergi Solans didn't leave Girona to go to Oregon State, like within a year or two, if you were to still be on that Girona team and, the MLS have to, or like an MLS club have to buy him, or you get a guy like that for free. And I mean, you burn an international spot, but, some of these guys are, financially worth it because there's a value on international spots as well. And that's kind of the way that I know a few of these guys in the technical staffs look at it. And that's why, you get some teams that trade away international spots because it's all about the value attached to it. And if they can't fulfill it, then you might as well get something for it. So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a long list of players that I think could have been advantageous for the Union, at least, if you look at or highlight any position to be like, man, it'd be nice if we had like a second or third guy in that spot who can learn from these guys and maybe even step in now if there's any injuries or international call-ups, or they're learning from those guys, and then if we sell somebody down the road, we have kind of this depth chart going where we can promote one of these guys. It's kind of like the NFL quarterbacks, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, just from like a Union standpoint, we're seeing how they're getting rid of these 3 draft picks, guys. That would tell me that Ernst Tanner has faith in the people that he currently has on staff, and I guess whatever moves they're planning over this offseason. Now, last year we saw basically Jack Elliott and Glessens get run to the ground. Then we get rid of Damian Lowe. So Nathan Harriel was our backup center back. So let's just focus on center backs right here. We have Macania and we have Pierre as our backups. So this move right now with this draft tells me either A, we're going to see a whole lot of those 2 guys, and we're going to have some rotation where we don't have to have a highly touted center back like that, or Tanner has something in the works with the center back coming in. So Todd, I know you had mentioned there's some sort of rumors going around over a center back coming in, being from across seas, South America. If you want to kind of share some thoughts on what has been floating around on Twitter.
Man, I haven't really even I saw the name, did not do a deep dive. I think Jose is probably better, or maybe Mark's even better to share thoughts on this. But a 25-year-old, I think he is 24-year-old Argentine center back that plays with Newell Young Boys, who the former club of Lionel Messi is Boyhood Club. So I mean that should be exciting for Union fans, right? Just knowing that they're linked to a player that played at Messi's boyhood club and a former Argentine youth national, which is also promising. I mean, you look at all these players that Argentina has produced over the years, and anytime you could be linked and potentially sign, an Argentine player that's played with a national team, yeah, I think that's promising. And Ernst Tanner, again, talked really heavily at his end of the season press conference that, it's no secret that center back was probably their weak link last year and that they were definitely going to do something. And, is this the player? Who knows? We'll see. But you also, you bring up Macania and then Neil Pierre reportedly. I know Jose talked about Neil Pierre a couple weeks ago, and right now there is no Jack Elliott on this roster, and so as things stand, your 2 center backs would be Macania and Jacob Glesnes. So yeah, of course you absolutely need a center back, and I would say even if the Union brought back Jack Elliott, they would still need a center back. That's what fans were calling for last year. That's what we were noticing. You mentioned it, Nathan Harriel being the 3rd choice center back with Damian Lowe being sold, and so when you had Damian here, you had your 3, and Jim Curtin no longer with the club. We all know. Seem happy with those three, rotating them in, and it's pretty clear that the club needs to go out and do something with the center back. But as far as anything else with this player, I couldn't really tell you why this player is being linked with the club. Mark potentially could share some.
Yeah, I guess for the targeting of them, they have a scout down there. I guess he used to be like a Manchester United scout, and he had ID'd him, and it's not like some random guy that no one else was interested in. I think there were some bigger deals that have been floated around for this particular player, but in the world of modern football finance, I think some of those deals fall through for a lot of clubs that just can't afford it, and I think that's kind of what's opened the door for a move to the MLS. And I mean, time will tell. I don't know too much about the player, but I mean that's just kind of some of the origin story on why this particular player. And I mean, I want to go back to maybe the GAM thing super quick. The trade itself, I guess, is telling. I mean, they're not going to go into this season without signing at least a couple more players. And I think sometimes what GAM can do is there's offers or there's deals that are like 100 or 200K away from actually happening. And sometimes you need to squeeze the juice out of the draft to just get a couple deals over the line and get some of these guys in, especially before training camp and all that. So, I mean, they're definitely. I know a lot of them are just actually this perception that no one's doing anything, and they just sit around and do nothing. Trust me, they're turning over any stone they can that they can, because honestly they really need to keep bolstering this lineup. And I think obviously everyone knows that, everyone talks about it to no end, but it's just finding the guys that are actually below their valued at a good place. Because I'll do a random story. So that Cincinnati forward that everyone was like, oh my God, they're spending that much money. Why can't we spend that much money?
Yep.
He was on the radar of quite a few MLS teams back when he was literally only going to cost $3 million. And that's the methodology behind a lot of this stuff. We don't need to wait a year or two to see that $3 million transfer fee go up to $16 million.
Mm-hmm.
We need to find the guys when they're at 3. And yeah, you might not have heard of them yet, but some teams just aren't having huge investments on just the transfer fees alone. So that's just kind of a mini aside there. But yeah.
Jose, do you have any thoughts on the new rumor kind of going around, or anything mentioned that Todd and Mark talked about?
Real quick,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Is Ian Glovinic, if I'm saying that correct, or at least trying to. I know we're live on YouTube, but people are listening back on the podcast feed, and so
sure
they might not have Twitter and see where this rumor popped up. But yeah, the player we're talking about is Ian Glavinovich. Sorry, that's probably the closest pronunciation.
Jose, go ahead.
Yeah, I believe he is half Croatian, as I understand it. He's from Argentina mainly. He represents Argentina at the youth level, and I would presume that his name is Glavinovic, or that's how he pronounces it in Spanish, whatever, Spanish Croatian, if that makes any sense. But in watching videos of him and listening to some interviews as soon as this crossed my phone earlier today, he seems like someone who's very athletic, someone who's got a lot of speed, pace maybe, and that's not tough to improve upon compared to what the Union have had this year and the last couple of years, especially after running Glessens to the ground. And even before that too, he was never the paciest of players, but certainly a strong player. if this is true, and I'm working my tablet while we were speaking, it'll be really interesting to see what does this mean for some of those other ancillary pieces that we're negotiating with the club, right? What does this mean for Jack Elliott? What does this mean for Brendan Craig, who was apparently also negotiating with the club, right? Are they suddenly, well, Jack is technically gone, but part of the union until January 1. Brendan Craig negotiating. Yeah, it'll be really interesting how this shakes things up. And going back to the end of season press conference when I asked Ernst about A, but I got answers for B, C, D, E, and F in terms of the roster size. He mentioned 25 to 27 players. I think right now at this moment they are probably closer to 24. I think was the count. So bodies have to come and bodies have to go, especially if you want to get to that number. There's going to be some shaking and moving around. So it'll be really fascinating to see how things develop in the next. I think it could be quick.
Also, just like Tanner put an emphasis on playing the players, playing the young kids. Maybe we didn't see enough of Bueno or whoever else you can think of. Marcus Anderson under Jim Curtin. But then you go out and you re-sign Olivier for what I think is 3 years for Olivier. So it's like, well, does Frankie Westfield then get brought into the picture here as a backup there? So I'm really curious how this back line, also the Kai rumors, it's like the Ben Simmons summer videotape. Every summer or every offseason, we have some sort of rumor going around about Kai Wagner, and he just sticks around for another year. So how does the back line shake up if he does leave or if he sticks around? And how do we put depth behind that? So I'm kind of curious to know what this team looks like. And if we play a lot of these young players, which it seems like Tanner wants to do we have a good enough team to actually compete on a consistent basis with the other teams of the MLS, especially with how the league is trending right now? And Todd, to your point from last year, like if a coach can't make the playoffs in a 9-team conference, what does that say about the coach compared to what the direction the team's going? So should the fans have lower expectations for this upcoming season? And I don't know how I feel about it as a fan first. I know, Mark, you're kind of like a quasi-Union fan now with all the talk with hanging out with Jose and Todd and I. I'm curious because we're almost at an hour here. What's your outlook on this upcoming Union season? And I guess any thoughts on the any other teams that maybe have a promising outlook next year?
He hates his fan base.
I know.
Whoa. No. Yeah, I don't know. They're passionate. And then, well, obviously you see just like the Twitter segment of it, but to say that they're going to compete this year, that'd be pretty hard to to sell. I mean, any first year coach, you're still rebuilding a lot. I think the rebuild might have been a long time overdue. But I mean, there are really good pieces there. I think it'll be interesting to see who ultimately they get as the next couple of guys to sign. Because we've all kind of talked about Danley and his best position and things like that. And,
sure.
Depending on a key figure added to the actual starting 11 and moving him into a normal spot and really seeing what he can do with a full season. And then obviously with how Ty did towards the end of the season, it's ideally you'd want to sign another forward, but I mean, with the type of form he was in, it's not like you're going in with a nobody up top. And then I think another year of maturity for Quinn and some of the younger guys. I think you have to believe in the type of growth. Like, no one's going out there trying to suck. So, I mean, I always say you got to try to support them or support these guys as best as you can because, they need the belief behind them and they'll fight in these games. And because, no one's going out there for the paychecks. Right. This isn't like a top 5 league in the world where, you're making millions and it doesn't really matter that much. And you can kind of tone it out. Like, they're not just showing up for the pay. They want to perform well. They want the backing of the fans. I could see them like latching on to a deeper playoff spot, but to say it's going to be a supporter shield type of year, I mean that's kind of tough. Again, especially for, I'm sure they'll hire a very experienced coach, but some things take time.
Sure, Jose, your thoughts there?
I agree with Mark, and I think that extends beyond the players, right? It really comes down to the staff and also them doing hard work, right? Like if this player is to, this Klavinovic guy, Ian, is to come to MLS and play with the Union. I mean, this is a guy who was on the verge, as I'm reading more, to go to Vasco da Gama out in Brazil. So like this is a serious talent potentially that the Union are getting at a very low risk when you think about a loan with an option to purchase, much like Hamir Berdesio, though. Hamir had a 4-year trail of potential years that they could have bought into. So I can't imagine that's the case with Ian. So it'll be really exciting to see if this comes to fruition. And I think all around it's just being able to, in your head, frame what the Union are doing, right? Or how they operate and being okay with it, right? Think about the sandbox in terms of they're going to focus on youth. They're going to focus on developing the American player and bring some of these pieces to trial and error and try to continue to elevate their academy and the work that they do. If that's not for you, the Union may not be the team for you. And that's tough for a lot of people to understand.
Especially in this market. But go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I want to, as you said that, I want to make this point. I think, and I don't know, I've never talked to Ernst, but I mean, when you look at the way the academies have been successful already, like with the Adidas Cup and things like that, where the Union or the baby snakes are just like running over all these teams from all over the world and like winning these trophies. I think maybe what I think might have happened behind the scenes is, you look at some of the biggest teams in the world in terms of like how strong their academies are and what they can produce, like the Ajaxes of the world, and maybe like PSG's, they release a lot of guys and they catch on other places. But I mean, there's big teams out there that are known for being like even the Barças of the world. And there was an opportunity in the U.S. to be that type of team that is like the best at creating their own talent and, getting these golden generations together down the line. Like I remember the Ajax team that went pretty far in the Champions League with a bunch of youngsters. And, obviously within the next 2 years, they all like leave for bigger money transfers. But I think that was like kind of the methodology behind it, because no other team in the U.S. I mean, there's a couple other leading academies out there who produce like really strong players, but I think that was kind of the methodology behind it. Is like no one else is doing it. We have an opportunity. We already have a strong youth system here. We can make it better, and we can be one of those teams that's world renowned for the type of academy products that they are able to produce.
Absolutely. Listen, guys, we're up to an hour now. We said earlier 30 to 40 minutes. That went way out the fucking window real fast. But it's been a great conversation overall. So I guess let's do a final thought. I mean, obviously, you guys are all working on off-season stuff too, so we can kind of plug in our own things here. So, Mark, I'll go to you first since you joined us from across the country here. So I appreciate you hopping on. What are you working on right now, and what are some things that we can see from your website or Twitter page?
Yeah, so basically, I'm here for the MLS College Showcase. It starts up tomorrow. The players just got in tonight. So that's the next couple days. I'll be working on some highlight videos for some of these guys that might be skipping the U.S. landscape and just going to Europe. So there's just a lot of like work for some of the players to get them in good positions to find opportunities. And then like I thought there would be a break after the draft last year, but there really isn't, because there's so many players out there who don't get drafted who are going to be looking for homes, and I think that takes a lot of work as well to get into the USL and CPL and some different leagues abroad. So yeah, just doing a lot of work for players. I'll probably post about some of them as time goes on, so you can viewers can get a glimpse of some of the names that are available, across the U.S. soccer landscape for whatever particular teams that they're fans of.
Awesome, man. I appreciate you joining us, like I said, again, because you're sharing insight that I don't know anything about. And I'm sure a lot of fans who are, maybe new to MLS and soccer in general can learn from. Todd, I know the free kick is always jiving and vibing every week. So what's new with you?
Procrastinating on writing. That is definitely what's happening. A lot of Call of Duty, as Jose calls me out on. But yeah, I mean, I put out a top 10 saves video last week for the Philadelphia Union. Yeah, I know a lot of crap people give Oliver Zemla, myself included, but he did have moments last year where he was very, very good for the Union, came up big. Portland stands out to me, particularly where that team was missing so many players for the international break. And yeah, I mean, players stepped up and they got a 3-1 win away in Portland, which is super duper impressive. And if only the season could have went like that, I think Union fans would have been quite happy if they could have got more of those type of results on the road and at home. But yeah, we'll come out with the top 10 goals video here in a couple days and get that posted out, and then just fully focus on the 2025 season. We all know MLS Cup came to an end this past weekend, and now it's just like tonight's episode, just focusing on what the 2025 season has in store. And I'm sure we'll get an announcement here in the coming weeks with whoever the new head coach will be. I know there's been a rumor, a name floated out there. We'll see if that comes to fruition. But yeah, I mean, just always content, always doing podcasts, YouTube videos, and yeah, I got to get back to writing.
Absolutely, man. Well, I appreciate you joining us as always. And Jose, I'll end with you. What's new with you on the Substack or anything going on Twitter-wise?
Just trying to keep up. I mean, again, I can't fathom or understand how people feel like there's nothing going on. There's so much going on across this league and Philadelphia specifically, and it just comes in ebbs and flows. So if I'm not doing anything, it's usually doing Union stuff. If I'm not doing Union stuff, I'm on the West Coast for work. So just trying to keep up with everything happening.
Absolutely. We have some off-season plans, I'm sure, in place with once a coach gets announced, Alejandro Bedoya's status. I'm sure. Isn't the expansion draft, is that part of the draft too, the expansion draft? What's that? What on with San Diego? Jose? Or Mark?
It's a separate thing altogether. It is tomorrow at 7:30. They have 5 picks total, and we'll see what happens.
What do you say, Todd? We didn't hear you.
10:30 Eastern time, 7:30 West Coast.
As you can see, Jose, unlike you, I've been completely out of soccer loop. I have no idea what's going on. Couldn't even tell me what day it is. I'm watching Providence and DePaul on my phone right now while I'm talking to you. You fine gentlemen. So I'm a sicko for college basketball. I know you guys are soccer, but I can't help the NCAA. But again, this is Across the Pitch. We'll go live again soon for some more off-season content. Mark, Todd, please join us again. As always, more than welcome here. Besides that, for myself, you can find me on Twitter, Embraer1323. If you didn't catch my Sons of Ben town hall that I did a couple weeks ago, I think I still have it pinned on my Twitter. Check that out as well if you want to see my most recent content. Otherwise, it's basically Big East basketball. So if you have an itch for that as well, hop on over and join me there. But otherwise, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Have a good night. Go Union.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.